Morning, everybody, as you're joining us this morning for another Monday session, motivation session, all about obviously, building better workplaces. And this morning we have Samir on the call, Samir Rawjee, which I'm actually excited about this morning. You know, you probably looked up Samir and you probably checked him out, knowing you as we know you. That's all happened. But I just wanted to mention a couple of points that Samir does help companies plan towards post AI society, which I thought was interesting. We have a lot of speakers talking on AI, and he kind of takes it a step further. Like, and what does that even look like? Where it's a world that's a little bit more human, a little bit more sustainable, a little bit more abundant. All of these things sound fantastic. And he has a recent book out, Taking the Anxiety Out of AI, and talks to us as humans and what we need to do between now and then to evolve. And he talks about things like doubling down on our strengths, and these would be sort of emotional strengths, intuitive, intellectual, spiritual, physical. And so that's kind of like what we need to bring our A game into the world that we're moving into. This is sort of AI, but post AI, to sort of strengthen ourselves. And I thought that was quite a refreshing kind of view. And it also helps the next generation coming through the workplace to create more of a social impact, which I think is very strong. I was at a recent marketing conference, fantastic, the IMC NetBank marketing conference that happens annually. And one of the speakers up there was saying something quite prolific, that 75% brands, if they went out of business, they wouldn't be remembered. So that's a little sad. And I think we all kind of need to up our game when it comes to social impact, with our communities, and finding maybe deeper meanings at work, and creating more of a purposeful environment, connecting people a lot more. All of these kind of things help build our brand and make us more impactful and make us more memorable. And this is what this whole call is all about in the first place, this whole series. Um, so it's not surprising that Samir produced a platform for 10,000 Google employees. That it's called Life Design, or About Life Design, which helped people find their purpose at work. So enough from me. I'm handing over to Samir and looking forward to this morning's session.
Thank you. Thanks for the great introduction. Remind me to get a copy of it. That was one of the best ones. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. And yeah, I think as you said, Paul, we have 20 minutes to chat, and then also happy to do some Q&A in the last bit of this, and share a little bit about what I've been up to on the journey of these talks and the practical work behind it. So yeah, thanks so much for having me. I am going to be talking about this notion of the purpose economy. My name is Samir Roji, and I've been very focused on this idea of how do we reinvent our careers for the AI future. And I am dialing in from Cape Town, where I've just started this new series at a time where I think everyone on earth is thinking, what's about to happen to my job right now? And so I'm going to share some thoughts that I've been asked to bring to companies across the world, such as Old Mutual, BMW, DHL. I'll just give you a teaser of this conversation, um, getting to, into as much as we can in the time that we have. And again, at the end, happy to answer any questions. So yeah, a little bit about what's happening right now. I'm excited to say that I've been invited to Google Talks, which is a large platform with speakers like Simon Sinek, Yuval Harari, to share my work on the purpose economy and the insights in my new book on this topic. So that means USB and its clients are, I think, amongst the first to hear this talk, and excited to share some of the latest research on this. But I think starting at the beginning of how I arrived at all this will probably give some perspective. If you don't recognize these trees, this is Pretoria. This is where I grew up. And as far as I can tell, there are only two people from here. It's myself and Elon Musk. And so if you're from anywhere else in South Africa, you'll likely avoid this city at any cost. But this is my home and our little piece of heaven. I went to a school called Crawford in Pretoria. This was my campus. And when I graduated, I thought I was going to the US. I got into a summer camp at Cornell University. I begged my dad to pay. He reluctantly agreed. Off I went to New York, Ivy League, big dream, right? And then I came home from that trip, and my dad said, "Welcome back, son. Just so you know, you're not going anywhere. You're going to study at the local college in the mornings, and then you're going to work at my office in the afternoons." And that's that. And I thought, look, this cannot be my life because just for context, my dad is a fisherman. He's in the fishing industry, super successful, but obviously that's not me. So I kind of deal with him and I say, if you let me go as far as Cape Town, I'll come back and work in your office. And yeah, like any child, I suppose, I didn't know how that was going to end up. So here's what actually happened. I dropped out after first year. I changed universities 5 times. I changed countries 4 times. I changed degree programs 3 times. I went all the way from studying finance to accounting to business and then design. And yeah, look, to an Indian dad, this is a total nightmare and a massive waste of money. But when it came time to getting a job, well, I applied to about 50 companies, and the only one that offered me a job was Google. I guess they didn't see my zigzag as a weakness. They thought it was exactly the type of route that they would want. And so I realized that I was not just hopping around, but trying to find a learning experience that would fit all my passions, all my talents, and all my values. Effectively, what a lot of, I would say, modern frameworks would call one's purpose. Now, when I got to Google, despite everyone having gone to the best universities, I discovered that everyone was looking for purpose too. It was something never taught at their schools. In fact, at Stanford University's second most popular class after computer science is a course called Designing Your Life, with more and more young people trying to find out why they should work than what they should do for work. Now, at the time that I was doing this, it kind of felt that maybe this is like a rich person's privilege, a rich person's problem. But this is not dissimilar in South Africa. Even low-income grads are telling us that they would rather work for just a little bit of money and spend more time at home doing what they want. And of course, many of them are living in state housing, townships, or villages with already owned land, and they're just not interested in doing work that they don't care about. And so I suppose what these insights did was that they showed that economies are always evolving and that the evolution of economies probably looks like this, the way that I've analyzed it in my work. The first is the industrial economy. Okay, so that's the mechanizing of goods and services that has brought us up until this point. Many of you have probably heard of the meaning economy, which was the big, of course, millennial idea of 10 years ago. I want to do more meaningful tasks at work. Then came the truth economy, which is the idea of acknowledging our historical racial differences and the work benefits that follow from that. It is now called the post-truth economy, but we'll get into that another time. Then we moved towards what we call the AI economy, which is replacing humans with tech, but also integrating humans with tech. And then finally, the purpose economy, right? Which is the idea that everyone works on what they care about in the context of corporations or their own ventures. And so I think what's really interesting is to question which economy we are in right now. And well, the answer is it's a little bit of all of them, right? I think what's really interesting is that the industrial economy is not over. For all of these GPU farms that are going to be built all over the world, there are not enough plumbers and welders. So AI companies are expecting to spend billions and billions of dollars to train new plumbers and welders because there's not enough of them on Earth to meet the demands of GPU and server farms. And it's also predicted that robots will not be good at those particular activities within the next 5 to 10 years. The meaning economy is still taking shape, with some countries catching up to others. There's less global noise on the truth economy, but still grassroots efforts. As far as AI, there's some countries that are doing better than others, but some industries, for example, in South Africa, banking and AI is far ahead than the US in many ways. So it's not necessarily a West versus East thing or global North versus global South. And then finally, purpose economy is, I'm starting to see it on its way, especially with the work that I'm doing with young people. And this is Gen Z already creating their own jobs, already skipping university, many of them feeling very, in a way, confident to drop out and skip the traditional route to create their own companies. Now, that's what I've found in my research, but I've also found that all the management greats have been saying the same in their own way. Peter Drucker is the guy that obviously is the godfather of management and influenced so much of Harvard Business School. But he mentioned the notion of workers eventually moving towards purposeful work. The idea that we will start in a mechanized way, but we'll eventually want to move towards this. Later, Abraham Maslow came in and said the same thing. We all know Abraham Maslow, right, from the hierarchy of needs. He wrote a beautiful book on management, which didn't become very popular, but he talked about the idea of firms eventually needing to design themselves around the notion of self-actualization and purpose. And the third is probably this guy that you've seen. I think some of you may recognize him. This is Rutger Bregman, and he's been invited to speak a lot about the idea of pursuing meaningful work. And he's currently set up a fellowship to help what he calls Ivy League students escape the Bermuda Triangle of the corporate world. And that means that young people can possibly contribute to a better future. They should not just end up being paper pushers as the way that he pitches it. And so that's the narrative right now. But I think we're also starting to see some shifts from an economic perspective that can back all of this and give us a little bit of, I think, motivation for what's about to come up next. So look, the great narrative right now is that AI is eating up the world, right? But humans always have new desires, and desire equals demand, and demand equals new markets, right? So there's no such thing as the end of work or the end of desires, because as long as people have imagination, they'll always want new things. And that also means that trends are always circular. I suppose that when we moved over to MP3, people started becoming interested in vinyl. We all wanted to have smartphones. Now people want to go to dumb phones. I don't know if you're hearing about this, but lots of people in Silicon Valley are realizing that smartphones are not good for our brains. So they're going back to these old Nokia 3310s to keep their brains alive. It was all about convenience, only meeting online, never going to work. But now people are in search of in real life experiences again. And so in a way, as things are becoming automated, people want to kind of go back to the basics. And so as Steve Jobs said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And so the question is, what have people not been shown yet? Now, that means that in a sense, markets are always growing, right? I think something that we've all fell short on in our economics classes at school is that yes, there is scarcity within markets, but the greater economy is always abundant. There's an infinite number of things that are coming up from the ground, and that's turning into currency. This is obvious, but I think it allows a mindset shift for people to realize that for whatever seems is being taken up right now, there is yet much more to come. And so things aren't as dismal as they might seem. So let's look at what this looks like practically, right? As Paul said, I've been writing about this in my book that just came out with Penguin more recently. And this framework is called Your Next 5 Jobs, which I think takes maybe what seems like a very aspirational view of the future and helps us to bring this a little bit closer to Earth. Give me a second here. I just need to plug in. I'm seeing something is not plugging in here. So, okay. So I think this is a framework that I've been using at a couple of the clients that I've been working with over the last few weeks, but also on the back end of the work that I was delivering at INSEAD Business School and work that's also been done at London Business School. And so I think when you speak about the future, um, people walk away feeling inspired, but not having some actionable next steps. And I've just worked with a big African bank to look at what this looks like in practice. And the 5 types of jobs, as I've mapped them out, are as follows. The idea of what we might call our least automatable tasks role would be the first one. And these are tasks within your role that won't be automated soon. And so, from a banking context, what we did was we looked at sales job and what types of roles would be automated first, and we ranked them in that order. And I think what was inspiring to see is that you have a sense of a view or a trajectory of where AI will come in first and where it will come in last, giving you a sense of the next potentially 3 to 5 years and how to manage that. And so, of course, you would have like the most basic admin tasks at the top, and you have your relationship building at the bottom, but defining it gives you a trajectory on how to manage it. I then asked them to use AI to actually figure out what would be the next great skills to develop as you build on building those future human-oriented tasks or skill sets. And obviously, if relationship building is a big one, then one might want to go into sharpening one's EQ, learning to build those deeper customer relationships, potentially approaching aspects of the job that require that intricate thinking. Again, these things are obvious, but if we can teach people how to break them down within their specific roles and across the board, what happens is that they start to get a view of how things are unfolding and how to prepare for that with what I suppose Stephen Covey has taught us is beginning with the end in mind. And that creates a sense of trajectory. The second job is what we call new business and products role. So if you have then now decided that you're going to double down on aspects of your job that can't be automated the most, what you are doing is you're showing that you can add new value in your role. And I think that's a very important part of showing how we should continue to be hired or continue to keep our jobs. But the next thing might be that in every business, there's always new products or new opportunities that we otherwise can't get to. And that's because we're always busy dealing with their existing business. But as AI takes up some of the tasks in our existing roles, it saves us a lot of time and gives us room to do new things. In the banking context, we brought this up, for example. And this was the idea that if you work, for example, in wealth management, there may be an opportunity to go into wealth and well-being management, which is now a new area going into the future. And I think you'll see a lot of this, for example, with Discovery Bank. The idea that people's well-being is connected to the way that they're managing their finances. And if it seems like a big idea to maybe work on that you couldn't get to before, it's something that you might add on to what you're doing existing. The third would be, for example, markets. We're all working in markets and they keep us busy. But if we can encourage employees, for example, to think about what would be the next version of the business or what would be the next markets that they can tap into, again, it shows new ways of adding value into the business when, for example, half of the hours in your job have been taken up, you can then fill in the new hours with new ways of adding value in the business. The third is what we call moonshots. This was a term that was cultivated at Google X, referring to ideas surrounding. Sorry, thought we got cut there. It's a term cultivated at Google referring to ideas surrounding the notion of shooting for the stars and landing on the moon. Some of you may have seen this term before, but it's basically the idea of getting to the so-called cool projects that we never get to. Again, we want to find out how we can reinvent ourselves as AI starts to save time, but also carve out time for us to work on new things. And so in the banking context, for example, one might think, well, a meeting ends with somebody saying, this is a great project that we could work on. What if we start a new type of a cryptocurrency? How can we work on that? We're now saying that these are not just new opportunities for people to work on within the firm to keep their roles, but also new ways to create revenue opportunities within firms. The fourth is what we might consider an SDGs role. Of course, a lot of the companies across the board are running on the basis of investors and shareholders. And as we move towards the future, what we might think of as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are required, at least at a government level, but sometimes at an investor level, to be built into the business models of companies that will shape the future. And so it's an expectation that companies will take care of these things, and either via charity or via the ways that these business models are actually designed is a requirement for how these companies are expected to function. And so, again, asking employees to think about new ways that these business models could evolve, that could, again, otherwise help their companies make a profit, but also allow them to add more value. There's tons of ideas to do that and ways of showing such value. This was in the banking context again. And then the final thing is what we think of as our human-centered markets, which is the big bet of what humanity will look like in the post-AI society, which is in a sense, we are expected to want more connection. We're expected to want more community. We're expected to build businesses around what we might think of as our core human needs. And so what I encourage people in the bank to think about is how can you take the skill sets you have and imagine what those future roles might look like? AI can prove to be very useful in helping us imagine those futures, but also to start carving out ideas on specific human needs after we've automated the basics. And so, based on what I showed you earlier about the evolution of the different economies, it's useful to see which economies each of these jobs fits into, with the first three fitting into what we might think of as the AI economy, and the last two fitting into what we might think of as the so-called purpose economy. And so, look, my philosophical view on this whole thing is that the theme for the next 3 years is obviously automation. It hasn't been oversold to us, it's already happening. But I also think that we as humans are meant to do more meaningful work, and perhaps AI is doing us a favor in this direction. Companies are also meant to do good while making money. So maybe the future is more like a blank canvas, and we can intentionally repurpose talent towards what we really care about. And in other words, build new business models and get to things that actually really matter. And so, look, I mean, in my opinion, there is really a once in a lifetime chance for capitalism and humans to thrive, right? Together. With that, I just want to share some final thoughts that I did share with some of these teams across these companies. And this is where I think the mindset shift comes in order to act on what I've just shared. I think that across the world, we might be expecting employees to develop what we call an entrepreneurial mindset, right? I mean, I'm sure you all know Apple had close to $1 trillion in their bank account. The money can't just sit there, right? It has to be reinvested. They expect Apple to continue innovating. What that means in a very practical sense is that as companies have saved tons of money from automation, post-automation, companies will have to reinvest in new versions of themselves. All the money they save, shareholders will expect new products and services to come up. And so aligning our skill sets with what those new horizons look like, again, gives us an opportunity to provide new value. And so at this moment in time, to keep your job, you have to create your job. Find out how what you're doing or what you want to do relates to the next opportunities and reinvent yourself. In which case, it's not so much of just about thinking like your boss, but thinking about or thinking like your boss's boss, your shareholders, and ultimately your customers. Next is that there's no single future, only multiple futures, right? I think we all see these very big talkers in AI, and I suppose as they speak about what's coming next, in many ways, they are telling us what they want to come next. But understanding that you have agency as an employee to create what's next and not just wait for that is also part of what we might think of as a mindset shift. And so the ultimate skill at this moment in time is perhaps discernment, separating hype from fear and from truth, and learning to tell the difference between the three. And I think something that's useful, not just for us on this call, I mean, I think about this, I have to remind myself about this every day, but I think it's a theme for people all over the world, is that you can never be behind, right? There's nothing to chase here. I mean, because they're kids that are not even born yet that will be billionaires. There are opportunities that have still not yet come. Elon Musk always said that the fundamental problem of Silicon Valley, which is now the fundamental problem of firms across the world, is that there will always be more jobs than the number of people with skills for those jobs. I was telling you earlier that I was in Canada. This is a big problem right now. Not enough people to fill jobs. And so learning to think for yourself and to spot what's next becomes the next major skill, even internally within firms. And I think finally, this idea of purpose can seem like a very soft type of a conversation. But in my view, when you match these ideas with what you might think of as as market dynamics, connecting your passions and your talents with the way the world is evolving, the next economic opportunities, I think it provides a very practical basis to the notion of purpose. Why? Because your inner voice is your only competitive advantage when everyone has access to the same information. We all have a unique neural wiring, which means we all have a unique way of looking at the world. Kevin Kelly, who is the editor for Wired magazine, he was said that we must all think about building what we think of as our 1,000 true fans. We don't all have to have a million customers. Find 1,000 people who resonate with what you do and build for them. But they very much are a reflection of how you see the world. And so your last superpower in that respect is that your ability to observe, to have an opinion, and to create on that observation eventually becomes your last superpower when everyone has access to all the same information. And I suppose it is on that basis that we move from, simply taking instructions as they've been handed to us in this current version of what we might call management or capitalism, into a version where we might be co-creating the next version of the future with our employers and with our companies. And so this was as much as we could have gotten to in this conversation. I think practical examples always right at home. But I think, yeah, bringing it from 50,000 feet to a practical level of how they can be applied, I hope was translated in the short time that we have. But I'd love to hear what you're thinking. And yeah, what maybe you got from this or the gaps that maybe you have. And happy to stick around for a few more minutes if you'd like. Paul, Kathy, I'll pass it over to you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Samir. Wonderful. And I love that last point there. I mean, love a lot of your points about that inner voice. And it is something we've got to keep in check and we've got to develop. So it's almost like a muscle, really, isn't it? What we keep feeding ourselves into. So we are a little over time, guys. So if anybody has to jump off, we get it. But there are some questions, and I thought we could get through them quite quickly, Samir. But there's a couple of good ones. So Pedro is actually currently lecturing at university and is
Uh-huh.
interested to hear about how do you see the archaic platform structures of academia evolving, given the trade-off between the need for blue-collar services, as you mentioned earlier, with the plumbers and the welders, and versus the desire for Gen Z to create companies on their own, versus the adoption of AI as an enabler, both at corporate and SME-sized companies, and just sort of to add to that, how will the gig economy thrive? So
How,
there's quite
sorry, how will the gig economy was the question?
thrive.
Good question. Yeah.
To
So
sort
I
of
think,
round it off. Yeah.
yeah, look, I think the gig economy has always been considered something that is a side hustle thing. You get your main job and then you do this thing on the side that maybe makes you a little bit of money. But look, all of us here have grown up in a world where we had access to limited information about how reality functioned, limited access to information about economics, about strategy, about the way companies work. But now, for the very first time, everyone has access to all information. There are no more secrets as they were. Whatever you've been told to keep you in your little corner is no longer the case for the next generation who has access to everything. If my generation had the dream to work at Google, the next generation's dream is to start the next Google. And that's the major shift because they believe that that's possible. Everything I've described to you about economics is what they know to be true because they're seeing that type of money floating around. I don't know if you know this, but there are games like Counter-Strike and Fortnite. I'm sure you've heard of these games if you have kids. But
Mm.
these are online games that function as alternative economies with over $250 billion being invested in what they call game skins. You buy these skins to dress yourself in a virtual world. But those skins are also used as currency to trade real assets in the material world, such as, can I buy your house with 5 of these digital skins? So these are worlds that we have not been native to. They are economies with way more access to currency that we are not even yet aware of. And so I would like to say, I think the world as it has been presented to us is a very small version of the total amount of possibility. And so the gig economy is just tapping into that and saying, hey, I'm sure there's a lot more opportunity than what I have been told.
Mm. Sure, I get you. And then do you see the the I mean, you have some insights into, universities and tertiary training and things like that. Do you see it evolving in terms of how it is, how everybody's being taught, or have you just answered that question that people are going to figure this stuff out whether we evolve or not? Um,
Yes, good question. On a practical sense of how it might apply at university, I mean, there's two things. There's the university side and then there's the student side. I think I've just given you maybe a sense of the student. The student is possibly thinking about how they might want to either A, drop out or B, never pursue university at all. Um, and B, on the university side, look, I think there are a lot of ways of looking at this. The question is, what is the usefulness of university right now? I would personally send my children to university because I think it's an opportunity um, to explore who one is in a social context outside of coming out of high school. I think the so-called human skills are super important. And if you think about getting an MBA, it's hard to say if there's a lot of material value in that, but the practical value is the network that you walk away with, the people that you're going to do business with. So I would think that maybe the higher education conversation shifts more towards that, less about doing assignments, which we all know are being done on ChatGPT. Um, and even now, as I hire young people to work in my company, I can't tell the difference whether these tasks have been done on ChatGPT or not. And frankly, it doesn't matter. But I just need to know if this person turns up with the client that they can actually manage a conversation without the computer.
yes,
So
good point.
no, they're all turning into borderline cyborgs. So um, double downing on that human aspect, I think, becomes the purpose of the university and possibly what the future of university looks like.
Well, I think that gave Pedro some nice insights. He's a lecturer there himself, so I think that would have helped. So Brian is the CEO. Some of you know him on the call. He's the CEO of Better Place to Work, and he thinks like Samir about how can we create better work environments all the time. So his question, his two, well, actually, he has three. But what is the practical first step I can take to prepare my team for AI adoption in a way that supports their confidence and growth? And can you provide examples of human skills that will matter most in the workplace as AI becomes prevalent? Now, I think you might have answered some of that, but maybe just embellish it a little bit. Um,
Okay, cool. So the first question is confidence, right? And stuff.
yeah, practical steps, exactly. Supports growth and confidence. Hmm.
Perfect. So Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn, wrote a book called The Alliance. I think it's the most important book to read right now because it's all about the idea of developing an alliance between the manager and the reportee. It would always seem like the reportee is under the manager, but now for the very first time, the manager also has no clue where the future is headed. Um, I think I think I think there's no CEO on earth that knows 100% what's going to happen. And so from a management philosophy, the idea is to build an alliance with the people that you're working with and say, hey, let's figure this thing out together. Number two is helping your people figure out what their possible future could look like. Some of what I've just described right now is really helping a lot of people in a practical sense because it's helping managers to give the young people on their team a trajectory for what their next jobs could look like. To say to your team, we can find a way to help you pursue your passions and your talents in the context of this firm. Let's co-create what these jobs could look like. Inspires a lot of confidence to A, stick around in the firm, but B, be a part of actually automating the firm. A lot of young people know right now that, I mean, just to give you some insights, there's friends of mine working in Silicon Valley, and every single phone call that they're having is being recorded for the purpose of possibly replacing them in 2 years' time. So they know that they're contributing to their own elimination. You'd have to give them some view of what the end of the line looks like in order for them to be motivated to stick around. And so I think when I did this talk at a big bank in Joburg 2 weeks ago, people walked away feeling like, hey, we're not just being used here, you know? There's something at the end of the road for us. And that gives us the confidence to stay here, but also help our firms get to where they're going to get to next. And I think if you help everybody understand that narrative, some of what I've just described, um, I think everybody gets on board. And I think that's a really, really good book to read for current times, The Alliance. The second part of your question was, will you just remind me?
Yeah, of course. Can you provide, sorry, can you provide examples of the human skills that will matter most in the workplace as AI becomes more prevalent? And I think you have touched on some of that, the
Yeah.
intelligence, yeah, being intuitive, and
Yeah.
but other things you mentioned.
Look, in a nutshell, if I had to just pick one thing out of all the things maybe we've all been reading and learning about is, you know, an entrepreneurial mindset is a form of freedom, isn't it?
Mm, yeah,
You're not dependent on anybody, on anything, because you are able to approach the world with a sense of empowerment and say, hey, I can make money doing this thing, which is why you will find a lot of schools are starting to include entrepreneurial skills into their curriculums. So teaching an entrepreneurial mindset, not just as a way of getting corporate work done better, but actually being a part of developing these future products and services, and having a stake in that, I think would be the ultimate skill, because you're showing value. You know, people are only have half the narrative delivered to them, which is, no, don't worry. As AI saves you time, you get to work on more things that you care about. But what does it mean when an 8 hour day drops to 4 hours? It can only mean one of two things. We're only going to pay you for 4 hours, or we're going to ask you to leave. Your job is to show how you can add value to the additional 4 hours so that you don't have to take home 50% of your salary. This is not being communicated. And the only way to do that is to come up with something that adds value in that second bucket. So, in every respect, I would say, yeah, an entrepreneurial sort of shift, learning to think like one's customer, especially if you've come out of a degree in finance or accounting or maybe even in science, I probably would think is the next greatest skill.
I love it. It's an absolutely brilliant answer. We could unpack that all day. Great. Well, Mercy, is also from Better Place to Work, has said, as companies are embracing the AI economy, in your view, what should employers be doing differently to ready their employees for the evolution of a purpose economy? And I feel you answered some of that as well, but maybe that one sort of point that you gave there, Brian, to sort
So Mercy's question is, how do we prepare employees for the evolution towards the purpose economy?
of, yes, yes,
Oh,
exactly. What should they be doing differently?
yeah. I mean, it's very empowering for me to give you like a runway, right, of how the economies are evolving, um, beginning with the end in mind. Like,
Mm.
wow, this is what 5 to 7 years could look like. Um, and these are not just my ideas, it's a logical unfolding of the economy. I've just broken it down, in a way that I approach in my work. And so instead of being incrementally reactive to each automation, oh my God, next quarter, AI is going to be able to do this part of my job. Now you react to that. Then January comes along and you're like, well, these four tasks that I was doing are now going to be automated next. I think sort of helping your staff think from 7 years time to where we are now, um, because in many ways, while the rate of tech cannot be predicted, the outcome of tech can certainly be predicted. We can
On that note, Kathy, I
The
think
infamous
we
cutoff.
may have the AI has sounded its tune. Kathy, I'm going to hand it back to you, but thank you all for your questions. It was fantastic.
Yeah, that was definitely taking a different aspect of AI there. Um, I think that what he was saying about, people are going backwards now to more simple things, is definitely the way to go, because it's just everything's so fast paced, and we kind of like just in a job to just be in a job. So I think everything that Samir has said is very relevant, and I think we do have to change. Otherwise, it's just the world is not going to work. So that was really insightful. So next week we have Fiona Passantino. She's based in the Netherlands, and she basically does empowering humans with AI integration and strategies to maximize communication. So we'll see everybody next week, hopefully. Thanks very much, everybody.